Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is Jill Danello from Green Education US, and we are pleased to welcome you all to this morning's webinar on customer safety. I'd like to introduce you today to Sarah Bolton. Sarah leads new business development at Blue Ridge Services. She's had many years of experience developing interactive and effective training for the waste industry. She has a master's in journalism and public relations and has helped to create hundreds of safety videos and worked with customers to create their own custom safety videos. Sarah, before we were starting this morning, we were talking about the new SWANA report that just came out, and you were sharing that although things have improved, we still have a long way to go. I'm going to turn over the controls to you, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about that new report and data that's come in.
All right, thank you so much, Jill. Hello, everyone. Really excited to be presenting this webinar today. And yeah, so Jill and I were chatting before we got started and just talking about the new safety fatality data that SWANA just published just this morning, I believe, for 2020. And I was pretty encouraged that our numbers are looking much better. We have reduced the number of fatalities, both among workers and customers. But, you know, I was just struck by the fact that there are still 2 to 3 people that are killed every week in our industry. And so we still have a lot of work to do. And that information really drives a lot of what I do and what my company does. And it really is a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. So that's kind of on my mind. Good news, but we got to keep up the good work. So we're going to be talking about customer safety training today. And just before we start, I want to kind of define who customers are. So for the purposes of this webinar today, we're talking about members of the general public who are not employees of the solid waste facility or operation. So that could be, you know, a family unloading their pickup at the landfill on a Saturday morning. It could be a contractor who unloads at the transfer station multiple times each day, or it could be a homeowner putting out their can as the collections truck rolls up. It could also be anyone on the roads when collections drivers are going about their route. It could be literally any other person that that may be touched by some aspect of the solid waste industry. So we're going to use the word customers, but it's a little bit more all-encompassing. So just keep that in mind as we talk through this presentation. So where do we find waste facility customers? Well, you know, most commonly at waste facilities, landfills, transfer stations, sometimes MRFs, compost facilities, but it goes beyond that. So we are going to see them at home, at school, at work, on the streets. So really in all aspects of our community. So, you know, customer safety, obviously, if you just think about it, it's really important. We want to keep people safe. We don't want to be killing people. We don't want to have injuries and fatalities happening. But beyond that, there's some other additional considerations to think about. There's, you know, beyond the moral responsibility, there are issues of liability, and you don't want your facility or your company to be sued because you killed somebody or severely injured somebody. We need to take that seriously. That can be a huge thing for a facility to deal with if they have to go through a lawsuit, which then gets into the economics. If you're having to pay out a massive settlement or even just pay attorney fees to go through a court battle, that gets really expensive. So there's some other things to keep in mind. Obviously, we want people to be safe, but there's other considerations as well. So how are we doing right now? We talked a little bit at the top about sort of the current safety data that's out there, and we're going to dive into that in a little bit of detail. But if safety was just a slogan, then we would be the safest industry because we have lots of slogans and lots of catchy phrases. This picture cracks me up, but also is sobering because there's a big old slow down to get around sticker on the back of this truck. And obviously that didn't keep this pretty bad accident from occurring. So we have to go beyond slogans, and we have to go beyond just catchy taglines and look at what are the actual steps to make our industry safer. So let's look at some of that data that we were talking about. So this shows 2018 through 2020, and these are fatalities of waste workers. And this data comes from the Bureau for Labor Statistics, and then the Solid Waste Association of North America, SWANA, typically takes that data, and they also publish it as well. They kind of parse through the data and make it a little bit easier to understand. So you can see that our numbers are slowly declining, which is great. I think we were at 60 in 2018, and I believe in 2020 it was 53. So that's great. That's really good news. But again, that's more than one person per week. So we're still looking at a lot of fatalities. The interesting thing is if you look at the other piece to that, which is customer fatalities. And a lot of times we don't talk about those fatalities because we're responsible for our workers. We know that we have to make sure they're safe, but we also hold responsibility for customers. So if we look at that data, we can see that this industry is, we're seeing a lot more fatalities among members of the public than we are among workers. And certainly, no doubt a lot of these incidents and accidents could be the fault of the member of the public or the customer in some way. So it's not to say that a waste worker is causing all of these fatalities to happen, but we have to look at this and we have to ask ourselves, what can we do to do better? How can we start to get these numbers down even more? How do we stop killing people in this industry, whether it's workers or customers? So this is just another way to look at the data. This is the percentage of customers. So if you look at the total number of fatalities of workers and customers, this is the percentage breakdown of how many customers are being killed out of those total numbers. So it's pretty high. It's pretty high. And a lot of these, the majority of them are related to collections, but there are a number that are happening at landfills and transfers and other types of facilities. So it's not just one area of the industry that we're looking at. This is across the board. So when we think about employees versus customer safety, it's kind of a no-brainer that we are giving our employees safety training, right? I think most of us are on board with that. But the interesting thing is if you look at these two groups of people, employees are the industry professionals. They have years of experience. For the most part, they hopefully understand the operation, while your customers are rookies. They may have zero experience in the solid waste industry. They may not know the difference between a compactor and a dozer and a water truck. They don't understand your operation. And yet we're giving the training to our employees, which we should, absolutely. We're requiring them to wear all kinds of PPE. But with our customers, sometimes we leave them out. We're not providing them with safety training, and we're not requiring comprehensive PPE. We might hand them a safety vest, but is that going far enough? Is there more that we need to be doing with that? So it's kind of the difference between these guys are the professionals and they have all the gear and the helmets. These guys are the rookies and they're not working with a lot. So we may need to beef up how we're thinking about our approach to these two different groups. All right, so we have a poll question that we're going to pop up. And the poll question is just asking about those of you who are on the call today. Do you currently have a customer safety training program at your facility? So yes, no, sort of, but it needs improvement, or you're unsure. So this is just getting at, what are you currently doing for customer safety training? All right, so we had 33% say that yes, 44% say no, and then 22% say that they're unsure. So that's putting, 2/3 of us today are either don't have a program or we're unsure whether we have a program, which makes me think it must not be super robust if we're unsure about it. So don't worry, you're in good company. A lot of people a lot of facilities do not have comprehensive customer safety training programs. It's just something that we just don't think about in the industry. All right, So here's a question to throw out. This isn't a poll question, but is it even possible to provide safety training for all customers? That seems like a really big task. And is that even our responsibility? Like, I don't know if I want to take that on. Well, let's think about an example. Okay, so let's talk about commercial airline customer safety. And I know that there are some specifics about how airlines do safety that are different than a waste facility, but let's just look at some of this information and some of the data. So according to the FAA, in a typical year, let's not consider 2020 a typical year, there are over 2.5 million commercial airline customers every single day that are going to an airport and getting on a plane. And every single customer receives safety training every time they fly. Whether you've heard it a million times or never before, you're going to have to sit through it, right? Those of us who travel a lot, you probably could give the safety presentation at a certain point. And they talk about things from where to park, where not to park, what are the luggage criteria, what do you need to take off in order to go through security, what sort of PPE is required, seatbelts, life vests, what's the evacuation procedure, where do you have to sit. There's a lot that we're told during these safety presentations when we get on a plane, right? If we break it down like this, it's quite a lot of information that we're covering. And how are we receiving this information? Well, lots of different ways. So we may get emails from the airlines prior to our trip. There may be information on their website. The flight attendant might always gives some sort of instruction, or maybe it's a pre-recorded video. There's an information card in the front pocket. There might be information in your in-flight magazine, or there's ongoing messages from the pilot. So there's lots of different communication channels, all kind of reinforcing the rules and the policies that you need to follow. So for those of you who've been on a plane before, have you ever heard a flight attendant say something like, oh, she just won't stop smoking, or that person won't stay in their seat, they keep trying to open the door? No, of course not. Of course not. The flight attendant is in charge. And if that behavior starts to get out of line, they have the authority to enforce those rules and policies. And if they don't, somebody could die. So they will kick you off the plane, right? I mean, if there's a security issue and there's a safety issue and somebody's not following the rules, they may emergency land that plane and kick you off, right? So it's really serious. They're not messing around. They're not kind of sort of enforcing the rules. They have to, because it's literally life or death. So maybe at your waste facility, you've heard similar kind of complaints, you know, that driver's always speeding, or my truck isn't maintained and it's not working correctly, or customers refuse to wear a mask, or they won't stop scavenging, right? We hear this a lot from our clients, that their landfill staff and their managers are having these types of issues with customers. But who's supposed to be in charge? Just like on an airplane, if people don't follow the rules at a waste facility, someone could die, right? It's really serious. So these are just one summary of a bunch of incidents that have happened. These were pulled from news headlines, and obviously we don't have the direct links and everything, but basically these were some of the actual scenarios that happened. You know, a distracted haul truck runs over a customer. There was somebody sleeping in a commercial bin. A compactor ran over somebody who was scavenging. These are real things that happen to real people. And so you can just kind of see the wide range of areas where these type of incidents can happen. And I would make the argument that with most of these, if not all, there were things that could have been done either by the driver or the facility or whoever else was involved to eliminate this situation from happening. Sometimes weird things happen, and that does happen. That's why we call them accidents. But a lot of times these things are preventable. All right, so let's hear from you guys. Are you having issues with customers not following or not understanding your safety policies, right? Sometimes they just may not know, or they might not understand why you're asking them to do certain things. So not at all. You're having no issues. You have some issues. Many of your customers are not following the rules, or it's absolute chaos. All right, excellent. So 14% of us say not at all. So I'm just going to turn things over to you guys. No, just kidding. So that's great. That's really good news. So you obviously have a robust program and some good implementation to be able to say that. That's awesome. 71% of us have some issues, and then 14% say that many of our customers do not follow safety policies. Really glad to hear that nobody is in absolute chaos. That's great. So we're already ahead of the curve. Again, this is really typical, and it kind of reflects the numbers we saw for those of us who had a customer safety program and those who didn't. If you have a really good program, chances are your customers are going to be more compliant and they're going to understand the policies, and you're going to be able to enforce those more effectively. So just real quick, to kind of, before we dive into some specifics about customer safety training, I did want to just point out that there are some obvious differences between facilities and collections, right? So we talked about the example of the airlines, and you know, an airline and a facility, a waste management facility, have the benefit of having one point of contact. So when you get on a plane, you have, one by one, you have to scan your ticket. There's that sort of controlled point of entry to where they can easily communicate with each and every customer if they need to. Same thing at a waste facility, right? So if you have a scale house or a gate house, everybody's got to drive through. They've got to talk to that attendant. They've got to pay their bill. You have that opportunity. You have that moment to communicate directly with them. It's a limited group of customers, right? So it's not the entire community at large. It's whoever is coming to your site with a specific goal, and they, have specific things in mind that they're doing. So it's a limited group. You have the ability to limit or control access to the facility. If somebody's acting up, you can just kick them out and they can't come back. You have that ability. So enforcement is easier. Collections gets really tricky because we have many points of contact, maybe hundreds or thousands of points of contact in one day. The interaction includes the entire community, including visitors or tourists who may know nothing about your solid waste management system or the schedule of when trucks come to pick up on certain days. You don't have a lot of control over the interaction because you have so many interactions and you're out in traffic with, you can't control what other drivers or pedestrians or bikers are going to do. You don't have control over that. So enforcement is difficult, if not just flat out impossible. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of the differences in how to communicate with these two different types of stakeholder groups. But I just wanted to call that out because I don't want to make it seem that these are one and the same. They're not. They're different beasts, and you have to approach them differently. Okay, so customer safety training can be done. And we saw some people on the call today who have good programs, and obviously they're working for them. So it's possible. Two things that we need to determine, and this applies to both facilities and if you're trying to kind of reach out to the general community for more for the benefit of your collections drivers, we need to figure out what safety training do we need to provide to our solid waste customers, right? We don't necessarily need to teach them about how to identify hazardous materials and how to, put out a landfill fire. Those are totally irrelevant topics, but sharps, scavenging, traffic management, PPE, we need to decide what is it that we need to educate our customers about, and then how do we communicate that information to the customer? And there's lots of different ways to do that, which is both overwhelming and great at the same time. So here are just a few topics that might be important to talk about with your customers. And this is not an exhaustive list at all, but maybe just talking about general site information, helping them understand the flow of your site and where certain areas are located and how to get there is a safety concern. They're not going to be wandering around into areas of the landfill they're not supposed to be, or, backing up at the transfer station next to in the truck area they're not supposed to be in. They're going to understand the flow. Just general information about waste collections, right? If you're reaching out to your community to educate them about solid waste management and collections, you can just give them general information about what the industry is about, what it does, the challenges of waste collections drivers, obviously safety policies and rules, safe operations, common dangers that they may encounter, and then PPE. And there's probably lots of other things that you are communicating to your customers at your facility, and every facility is unique. So you may have unique things that you need to communicate. Certainly over the last year, a lot of what we've been communicating has been related to COVID precautions, whether that's wear a mask, social distance, right? So it's ever changing. We have to be able to respond and change as new safety risks come up. So before we start building an awesome customer safety training program, we need to start by understanding our audience, which is our customers or our members of the public. So we just start with basic demographic information. How old are they? What's their gender? How do they get their information? What languages do they speak? That one's really huge, right? We see a lot of facilities that have safety information, but it's only in English, and 30% of the drivers that come through their gatehouse speak Spanish. And so they're not really reaching that group of customers at all with any safety information. They're just driving blind. Do your customers prefer face-to-face or online or something else? The many other types of ways that they can get communication. And there's lots of ways to get that research, or to do that research and get that information. So you can ask them directly at the gatehouse or scale house. You can ask them, how do they prefer to get information? Do they have specific communication channels that they use? You could have your gatehouse attendants kind of keep just a tally of the languages that the drivers are speaking as they come in. So you could start to see what percentage of drivers are needing what, are speaking what types of language, right? So you can ask your customers, do you know our safety rules? Do you understand them? Do our signs make sense? Are they confusing? Are you confused when you get here? And you can always remind them about other ways to get information. So you may verbally communicate something to them at the gatehouse, but they may not know that they can also get information on your website, or that you have a social media page. And then you could also create and distribute a survey. And this is really beneficial if you have a way of reaching out to all of your customers, or if you've partnered with some local community organization and you can send out a community-wide survey to ask people these questions. That's really helpful. And a lot of times there may be other organizations or entities in your community where you could get this type of information on your community. You can get demographic information and, languages and all of that information. A lot of that is readily available from other sources. But just really get a picture before you start of what's going to be the most effective. Because there's lots of different methods we can use. Just like the commercial airline example, that list of all the different channels, whether it was the website or emails or verbal communication or video or the card, there's lots of different ways that we can communicate information. We just want to pick the ones that are most effective, because chances are, unless you have an unlimited, training and marketing budget, you have to focus your efforts, and you have to choose those channels and those methods that are going to be the most effective. So there's lots of different methods. And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but I just wanted to call out a couple of them. So, emails are a really effective way of reaching people. If you have access to that information, that can be really effective. If you are trying to reach out to your community as a whole, you could put a sign or a truck wrap on your collections vehicle, or you could put signage on your bins that maybe takes customers to a video or a web page where they can learn more, or they can get safety tips. Another way to reach out to your community is to partner with local government agencies and, your traffic management and pedestrian safety departments. Would there be a way to piggyback or to work with them to create some sort of PSA or some way to educate the community at large, not just about safe driving in general, but also safe driving around large trucks and what blind spots that large trucks have, because that would impact many different industries, not just the solid waste industry. And then school programs. If we can get to kids I have 2 young children, and they tell me when I'm putting the wrong thing in the recycle bin or if it's not supposed to go in the trash can. So, getting into schools and educating children is a great way to start that awareness from a really young age. And then that just, trickles down as they grow up. They have that knowledge and that understanding from a really young age. And then college programs, same thing, get young people involved. So lots of different ways to reach out to people. The key thing is to keep the information bite-sized. Nobody wants to read through a 4-page text document or watch a 15-minute video. I think the attention span for most people today is in the seconds, where they will watch a video and they'll decide within seconds whether they're going to keep watching that video or they're going to turn it off. And most people will turn off videos, a couple minutes in. So you have to keep things bite-sized, break up information into shorter videos, or use multiple signs, print safety rules and tips on your receipts, and have multiple stations at a facility, have multiple stations along the way that may communicate different safety tips, right? So, or safety rules. The scale house attendant may say, hey, our speed limit is this. And then they get to the spotter, and the spotter says, make sure you have your safety vest on. And then they communicate with another employee and they say, hey, listen, no scavenging. So just think about how you can cover all your bases, but also not overwhelm people. And surprise your customers, right? People start to get acclimated to the same information. If we've all seen 30-mile-per-hour speed limits, right? It's just like, 30 miles, but 12 and a half, what? That's going to make someone stop and think and maybe check their speedometer and make sure they're not speeding. We had a client that set up a mannequin similar. This guy's in a hardware store, so doesn't look like he's headed for a landfill, but they had a mannequin set up similar to this along their access road that had all the PPE that they wanted their customers to wear. And the customers gave him a name, and he became like this character at the landfill. But it was just something different, and it caught people's attention. It communicated what they were trying to communicate, but it did it in a fun, unexpected way, right? And that's what we need to do sometimes, so that people pay attention and we make it fun, we make it interesting. All right, here's our last poll question for the day. So how are you guys communicating with your customers? And again, this is not a comprehensive list, so you may choose other. And oh yeah, that's great, you can put it in the chat if there's other communication channels that you're using. And this one I know we're taking a little bit longer because there's a lot to choose from. Awesome. Okay. So 13% using videos, 25% website, 25% in person at the scale house, 88% of us are using signage, 25% handouts, and then we can look in the chat to see if there's anything else. Okay. Cool. Awesome. So it looks like a lot of us are relying on signage, and that's great. Signage can be really effective. The thing to consider is, are your signs in one language or multiple languages? And is that the most effective way to communicate? Do your customers prefer somebody talking to them, or do they want a handout that they can stick in their visor, or do they want to watch a video? So again, it's just going beyond the assumption that, oh, well, signs are what we've always done, so let's just keep doing it. Maybe that's not working. Let's consider these other channels. Even if you have signage is great, but how could we enhance that? So one thing that we have found to be really effective is a customer safety video. And we have produced hundreds of these over the past 5 or 6 years for different types of waste facilities. And it's essentially, a lot of times we'll go on site and we'll film at their facility, so it's really customized. And it's just sort of a walkthrough for the customer of, when you pull up to the scale house, here's the procedure. And when you go to the active face or the unloading area, here's the procedure. Here's all our safety rules. I did one for a landfill up in Canada, and it was pretty straightforward. But the one thing that I had no idea about was this thing called a hot box, which is a hilarious title. But they, if your load is frozen, which happens, I'm sure, a lot in Canada, you back up into this building and they basically defrost your load so you can go unload it. So that was a fun little tidbit that I had never heard of that before. I was like, oh, that's like that's a northern thing. But yeah, this can be a really effective way to communicate with your customers. People love video. And if you have lots of people and faces and your staff in there, and you can even get your customers involved with that. A lot of times we'll ask the facilities to ask some of their customers if they can be on video, and we'll film in the cab, and it's a lot of fun because it engages everybody, but it's a very effective tool. People, and even if you can add subtitles for different languages, we've had them translated into multiple different languages for different facilities, so it can be really effective. And those videos are utilized in lots of different ways. So we've seen clients put a link or a QR code on a sign where they can, scan it with their phone. Sometimes they'll actually hand drivers a tablet so they can just sit there and watch the video, and then they'll give them a sticker to slap on their bumpers so that the landfill staff knows, okay, this driver has watched our video. They should be aware of our safety policies. You could put a link on your receipts. You could host an event for your haulers, right, where you bring people in and do lunch and a safety video. If you're thinking about reaching out to the community, you could, ask for time on local TV stations or have it posted on different organizations' websites, share it on social media. I mean, it's unlimited the ways that you can use it. And then just to touch on enforcement, just briefly as we wrap up here, all the planning and the communication in the world doesn't really work if you don't have some way of enforcing your policies, right? So if you tell your customers, don't speed, but then your customers can speed and nothing bad happens, they're going to keep doing it, right? If they want to speed, they're going to speed. So you have to have some sort of consequence. And we had one client, I thought this was great. They had a customer safety video, and if they caught someone speeding or breaking any of the safety rules, they had to park their truck and they had to come into the scale house, or they could just give them a link now if we're doing social distancing, and they had to watch that safety video as their fine for breaking the rules. And then the manager would have a discussion with the customer and say, are you understanding why these rules are in place? And I thought that was really great. So it wasn't just like, okay, you're getting punished, but we are having a consequence, but we're using it as an educational opportunity. And then sometimes you have to kick people out of your site, and you have to have somebody who is enforcing those rules and who's willing to do that and say, you can't come back, or I'm calling your boss. If it's a hauler, I'm calling your boss and I'm going to tell them you're done, you can't come on site, or you're banned for 30 days or whatever that might be. You have to have that enforcement and that follow through in order to make these programs work. And that's never the fun part, but it's kind of that final piece that really and truly makes these programs effective, is you have to have that enforcement piece. And we see a lot of times that's kind of dropped off. The program is great, and then the enforcement falls by the wayside. All right, so quick summary. Solid waste industry customers and the general public are at risk. We need to provide safety training for them just like we do our employees. And we got to think about what information would allow a customer to make their own actions safer, because ultimately that's what we're wanting to do. We want to empower them with information and understanding so that they know the right choice to make when they're in a situation where they need to be safe. And then research the best way to communicate that safety information so that it's most effective and you're reaching the largest number of people with the most effective information. All right, that's all I've got. Thank you all so much.
Great, thank you, Sarah. That was excellent. While we wait for Rob to join us and get set up here, I do have a couple of questions for you. The first, who would have thought a year ago that PPE would become a household term? And that all of us would be learning so much about how to motivate or understand people's both compliance and resistance to wearing PPE. I'm curious, with COVID and what new things we've learned, has that influenced or changed the direction of any of your customer safety programs or how you interact with the public in getting the PPE requirements at a site to get compliance at a facility?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think what we have observed with our clients is that customer safety has really been brought to the forefront over the past 12 months because we have been asking so much more of customers. And so I think some of the holes in communication or safety plans in relation to customers have really come to light. And the tricky thing is that especially, you know, if we think back to a year ago and like March, April, May of last year, it was so chaotic and everything changed every other day, it felt like. And so I think it was difficult to kind of keep track of all that and to, you know, communicate to customers. But what we found to be the most effective was to have a plan, first of all, you know, have an SOP, a standard operating procedure, make sure that all of your staff are super clear on what that is, and then have that enforcement in place. And just, you know, it's sort of non-negotiable for some of these things. If safety violations could impact other staff, and just explain that to your customers and say, you know, if you show up and you don't want to wear a mask and then you get one of my staff members sick, we may have to shut down our facility. And then what are you going to do with your recyclables or your waste? Like, you know, it's such a, there's so many levels of impact. And so just being really clear and communicating that and being willing to be flexible, both internally and with your staff as things, because we're going to see another period where things start to relax and things start to change again, where maybe we don't require this or we don't require that. You have to have flexibility in your plan to be able to change your messaging in response to everything that's changing.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, we'll bring you back at the end of the session today for further questions and discussion. But want to go ahead and turn things over to you, Rob. Rob is the president and founder of the SWEEP Standard. Many people know him as the founding father of LEAD and all the work that he's done in the green building side of things. So thank you for joining us this morning, Rob. Curious to find out how SWEEP is addressing this issue of safety in the workplace for the waste management industry.
Thank you so much, Jill. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today, and thank you for sharing your time with us. Perhaps the simplest description of SWEEP is LEAD for solid waste. And what we've tried to do is create a framework for triple bottom line excellence in the waste management industry. The certification focus is on the municipal programs that manage solid waste, as well as the performance of the solid waste companies that provide some or all of those services to municipal programs. We have 5 categories, starting with sustainable materials management policy, moving into waste generation and prevention, which is looking at waste data, statistics, analysis. As the policy section implies, we're looking for everybody to have a good policy framework for solid waste and sustainable materials management. And then we move into the more specific supply chain, if you will, of waste management, where we look at the solid waste collection elements, the post-collection recovery of materials in a variety of methods, and then finally looking at post-collection disposal. It's in these latter 3 areas where most of the safety emphasis in SWEEP is. Not unlike the LEAD standard, we try and reference familiar pre-existing types of programs and recognize recognized best practices in promoting safety, so as not to reinvent the wheel, and also to reinforce the good work that has been promoted by many organizations such as SWANA in this very important area. I learned a lot today from Sarah's presentation, and I've been inspired to think possibly about creating an innovation credit around customer safety programs as something that could receive credit specifically in SWEEP. We have credit for programs that educate the public. So, we could have a customer safety education program could conceivably fall under credit in that. But given what I found to be completely eye-opening statistics about how dangerous this industry is to the public in general, and I mean, we already recognize that waste management industry is one of the top most dangerous jobs in the economy, and then to learn that even more people are killed or hurt, just during the course of waste management services was I found very eye-opening. So SWEEP is comprised of credits, and each of these credits has a certain number of points associated with them. There are 100 total points. So given that SWEEP has 6 credits and 15 points for safety programs, indicates that this is something that we take very seriously. And as we'll see in a few minutes, our safety approach, again, is mostly inward focusing on the operations of the facilities and looking at safety management of equipment, as well as the safety training programs that exist both in the collection/operations and facility areas. So the first credit is in the solid waste collection area, where there is, a credit for commitment to safe working conditions, and the intent of this is to ensure worker safety and health outcomes during daily waste collection through hazard identification and remediation, and making worker protection part of the organizational culture. So some of the requirements that we look at are with a goal of increasing overall operational oversight of safety resources and awareness. And so we make it a priority to protect workers from danger on the job, including during collection, inside the buildings or the cab, and as well as next to the vehicle during the hauling or loading and unloading of materials. And part of this involves documenting all of the potential hazards that are encountered during daily activities, and then creating materials and training around those identified hazards. One of the key elements, which I think echoes nicely what Sarah was talking about earlier, is the importance of having these materials in the native language of the people who are doing the collection activity, whether it is loading or unloading or driving. In addition, we also have a requirement for what are termed to be accessible trainings. And so not only does that include language, but easy to understand illustrations so that interpretation is not an issue. And obviously, having symbols and illustrations also must be vetted for clarity to ensure that the message is coming across. As I noted at the very beginning, we're looking at best practices. So, the ANSI standard Z10 or the OSHA standards and requirements 3071 and other recommended practices form the foundation of what we're looking at. So, we sort of have a foundation of standardized best practice, and then activities on top of that enforce, enhance, and improve upon the minimum level efficiency performance that those standards embrace. Looking again at the vehicles, we're looking at ways to reduce accidents and injuries. And so, again, having that basic practice foundation for the Motor Carrier Safety Administration requirements, and that forms the basis of the training, and ensuring that all of the requisite inspections and everything. So on some level, we're giving you some credit for just obeying a law, but sometimes laws are obeyed in the breach. And so just reinforcing the fact that, there are important comprehensive safety standards out there, and ensuring that those are enforced is an important role of a voluntary standard such as SWEEP. And then we also give credit for having an OSHA level audit by a qualified auditor. That can be a state level safety hazard inspector, as well as a federal safety standard professional. And then to Sarah's point about how every time you get on a plane, whether you're a 1,000,000-mile flyer or somebody on their first trip, you get the same safety demonstration every time you get on the plane. And so one of the aspects we like to emphasize in SWEEP is to have safety meetings where the safety checklist, not only for the equipment. So for example, you can see a guardrail next to this waste truck that can prevent either pedestrians or bicyclists who may not be paying attention, right? Lack of paying attention, whether it's by the driver or by a pedestrian. As a cyclist in New York City, I witness all kinds of idiotic behavior by my fellow cyclists, by pedestrians, by drivers. So there's a lot of shared responsibility here. But if a piece of equipment, such as one of these safety guardrails, can prevent further damage to somebody who's not paying attention, whether it's the driver or whether it's the pedestrian or cyclist, we think that's a good thing. And so, this is just sort of a partial list. Not only do we emphasize the process of going through the checklist every time, but also having equipment that is inherently safe in the collection process. Moving into the recovery, so PCR stands for post-collection recovery, and the SWC stands for solid waste collection. Apologies for all these acronyms. It's sort of a hazard of the standards business, whether you're in the voluntary standards or in the mandatory standards business. And so, our goal is to reduce accidents and injuries and ensure worker safety and health outcomes, very much like the requirement and intent for solid waste collection. So we're emphasizing incentive programs, safety incentive programs that do not connect with accident-free periods. When this was first suggested during the standard development process, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Why should we not encourage accident-free periods? As it turns out, what the accident-free periods ended up incentivizing was not greater safety practices, although that was certainly, a partial outcome. But what ended up happening more often than not was that injuries and accidents were not reported. And, obviously we want to avoid accidents, but, if you're not reporting them, then some conditions or activities or knowledge may not be conveyed either to management or to workers, or, things that could be prevented are not being prevented because of lack of reporting. So our goal is not necessarily zero accidents. Our goal is, if there are accidents, to correct them. And that's why we don't, incentivize zero accidents, rather ensuring that if accidents occur, or and we don't emphasize, zero or perfect OSHA scores as the basis of the credit. Is the basis of the credit is, if you found something, did you fix it? And so, focusing not we want good performance, obviously, but good performance, comes from real reporting and real activities. So not unlike the other aspects, we have requirements to have weekly training and demonstration, accessible training materials, as well as basic training and advanced training for people who are doing jobs that are either more complicated or build on the basis of that original safety requirement. And then we look at the facilities as well, and making sure that they go through the OSHA audit. The goal is to promote safe and efficient operation of material recovery and organics processing facilities. And again, the goal is not to have a perfect. Well, it is. The goal is to have a perfect score, but that's not the basis of the credit. The basis is, if you found anything wrong from an OSHA perspective, did you fix it? And if you fixed it, that's what you get credit for. And then, we want this to happen on a more regular basis than is necessarily required by the law. SWEEP is a leadership standard, and the SWEEP Plus standard, which is what we're talking about, is focused on the top quartile of the market. So if you get certified under SWEEP Plus, you know that you're in the top 25% of the industry in terms of your triple bottom line performance. And triple bottom line is, people, planet, profits. So your people are healthy, you're providing an economically, affordable service, and it is minimizing the environmental impact of those activities. Getting into the disposal category, so PCD is post-collection disposal. Very much like the recovery facilities, our goal is to reduce accidents and injuries. We emphasize in this, not as well as in the recovery facilities, the abilities of workers to communicate their opinions without fear of retribution. The goal, again, is not accident. The goal is accident-free, but not as a basis of not reporting, but as a basis of issues that are reported and fixed. So we want to make sure that a facility and a worker in a facility has the ability to report unsafe conditions without fear of retribution, and that everybody in that facility is trained in the language using graphics based and other types of very clear videos that are very clear about what's expected. And then finally, again, OSHA compliant facilities, very similar to the material recovery and organics recovery facilities, ensuring that landfills and other disposal facilities promote safe and efficient operation of the facilities, and to go through the OSHA audit process, ensure that any deficiencies are either fully corrected or in the process of being corrected. And then also to go above and beyond OSHA through a voluntary protection program. So that is a very brief overview of safety in SWEEP, and happy to go over any questions or comments that folks have.
Great. Thank you, Rob. While we wait for people to post their questions, I have a question for either one of you. We spoke about the fatalities and the data there. I imagine that the non-fatal injuries is exponentially higher. And I'm curious, given the costs, the real costs of having fatalities or injuries happening on site compared to what I would think would be lower costs of implementing effective training and enforcement protocols, where do you see, what's the biggest resistance? What do you see as some of the performance gaps in being able to meet the requirements to have effective programs?
So, yes, and that's a really good point. The number of injuries is much, much higher. And I don't have that data right in front of me, but the Bureau for Labor Statistics and probably SWANA as well has that data if anyone on the call is interested. You know, that is like the question that we ask ourselves all the time, because when a lot of times we see facilities start to take safety training, whether it's for workers or customers, seriously when they're in the middle of a lawsuit or somebody's been killed, and then suddenly they're all about it because it's like so real and in their face. And yeah, I mean, the cost to go through a lawsuit or even for just an injury, or to, you know, to pay out a settlement is exponentially more than having a really robust comprehensive training program. So we kind of search for that mechanism that's going to convince people to take action before somebody gets killed. And it's just hard to do that sometimes. But, you know, I think educating people like what we're doing right here, and I think I think SWEEP is going to help drive that change and help people systematically look at their safety programs and hopefully start to make improvements. It's just all of those things. But yeah, that's a hard thing, and we see that a lot, and it's really hard to see a
I
fatality
think a lot of these areas
happen.
are under-resourced and overworked. And, you know, the liability, I mean, you know, liability tends to be paid out of insurance. Insurance tends to come out of the general fund. So there's not necessarily that direct feedback between, if some department or other has an accident, it's not the department that quote suffers. It's the city is the one that is charged, and insurance is, you know, sort of general. So there is a bit of a disconnect, I think, in the feedback. And again, SWEEP wants to be encouraging and not punitive. We want to recognize and support leaders in that. And so there's a question about injury reports. And Mr. Chavez asked, are injury reports to SWEEP for credit verified or compared to official injury reports such as the OSHA Form 300? That's a terrific question. And in fact, the OSHA 300 form is the basis on which SWEEP reporting is based. So if you are going for a safety credit, you are asked to submit your Form 300 to verify your performance. So, we don't want to create a whole separate compliance pathway. So if there are existing reporting mechanisms such as OSHA Form 300, or a state level equivalent, that's what we would require as part of the documentation.
Great. Well, thank you, Rob and Sarah, both. Excellent presentation. Difficult topic for sure. Before we break today, I'd like to hear from each of you, for any of our participants, if they'd like to get more information from you, how could they get in touch? What's the best way to engage with you from here on out?
Okay, I'm going to put my address, my email address in the chat box, as well as the web address for the SWEEP standard, if anybody is interested in downloading that. And so really appreciate people's attention and sharing your time with us. And we look forward to working with you to, make this vital industry more economically, environmentally, and socially acceptable. Not acceptable, I'm sorry, performing. It's really something that is not getting enough attention, I think, in our society.
Yeah, and I went ahead and dropped my email address in the chat as well. So you're welcome to reach out to me if you have any questions. But thank you all so much for your time today. This has been great. And
there's a little button in the chat function where you can download the whole chat. You should be able to do that. If not, we'll make sure that this information gets to you as part of the presentations that are shared.
Excellent. Thank you. And as you log off, you'll receive a brief survey. We'd love to hear further thoughts of any questions that you have from the webinar or any follow-up that you would like from either Rob or Sarah. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.